If you've ever been on Instagram or listened to Joe Rogan's podcast, or you've been around the motivational block, you may have heard of David Goggins. Now, Goggins is one of the most badass people on the planet today, at least that we can see on social media, because I'm sure there's lots of badass people out there that just don't post things. Anyways, his signature line is, "Stay hard." Stay hard. So, what does that mean? First of all, I mean, it's half obvious, but it's really interesting because we live in a world today where there's a lot of comfort. There's a lot of comfort in our cushiony modern world. Now, a lot of people think Goggins is crazy, and I'll be honest, I think he might be just a little bit crazy. I mean, he's running miles and miles and miles while his kneecaps are exploding. I mean, that might be a little bit crazy. But is he onto something that perhaps a lot of us are missing in our modern world? Now, Ronald Bailey and Marian Tupy, they authored a book together called 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know. So I saw that in the bookstore and I said, well, I don't know if I'm a smart person, but maybe I should know these anyway. So I picked them up, and it's essentially a compilation of graphs and scientific data that really just shows global trends in the last decades. I mean, it depends on the data, but some of them go back 100 years. Some of them just go back a few decades. Now, I'll confess, I haven't read this book from start to finish because, let's be honest, it'd be a little bit dry. I mean, imagine turning the page of a book to find yet another graph, a 50th graph in a row that you have to read about. I mean, I love math, and I always have, but I don't know if I want to read a book full of graphs. But it's a great reference. I flip through it as a reference for certain episodes or when I'm maybe reading a book on another topic. So I recommend picking it up, and it's actually a beautiful book too. I mean, there's something to be said about just a nice, beautiful, good-looking, attractive, handsome book, right? But in sum, the world isn't as doomed as people tend to think. We have this perception that we're on the brink of collapse at all times. And hey, we always are, because we have our demise, our own demise. And, you know, societies have always risen and fallen throughout the centuries. I mean, look at the fall of Rome, for example. I mean, Rome wasn't so different from how America is today. And also Great Britain. I mean, Great Britain's still alive and thriving, by the way. But, you know, they certainly had a peak in their imperialism, right? And they're kind of, you know, they're on their own now, and that's great. We're all living in peace and yada yada yada. But the point is that yes, there's something to be said about this idea that there's doom coming around the corner, and that's humanity's burden, the awareness of our own death, and ultimately the awareness of the death of our community, our country, or potential death at least, and so on. And heck, I remember, if anyone's been around during the year 2020, you know, everyone thought the world was going to end. I mean, these doomsday predictions are always present in some capacity. There was also one in the year 2000, which I would have been a bit too young to really remember, but I was alive at the time. And yeah, I mean, we always think that the world is kind of falling apart. That's built into our psychology. However, the trends, if you look back over the decades, the data says that it's not as bad as you may think. Now, if you were to look at the last few years, you may notice that globally, you know, we've engaged in a few wars. But even with this, global conflict does trend lower over the decades, a trend which we should all hope doesn't change. Here's some examples of trends that have gone down. If you look at the global homicide rate from 1990 to 2016, it peaked at about 7.5 murders per 100,000 people and was down to 5.25 murders per 100,000 people in 2016. Countries that abolished capital punishment, that is, you know, the punishment by death for certain crimes, that went from nearly 0 in 1863 to over 100 in 2018. So we're killing less people for certain crimes. Global battle death rates went down from 22 deaths per 100,000 to less than 2 per 100,000 people in 2016. Global genocide deaths, military expenditures, armed forces worldwide, nuclear warheads worldwide, all of these have declined over the previous decades. Now, if that isn't enough, Let's just think about this logically. Consider what most of your ancestors had to wake up in the morning to do, right? They had to wake up with an empty stomach. They probably didn't have a great blanket. I mean, maybe it was a thin rock or something that they pulled over themselves. They had very little food. They had to go hunt or gather all of their food. And now, you wake up in the morning, you turn on your shower tap, and, you run your hand under the water, and you're groggy, you haven't had your coffee yet, and, you got morning breath, and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, that water is still, I mean, it's warm, but it's not warm enough, man. I need to get that just a little bit warmer. I can't deal with that, that lukewarm water temperature. It needs to be hot. I like it hot. And then you go to work and you come home and, you have your AC and your heat on this thermostat that's hooked up to the Wi-Fi, and it's time to start exactly 30 minutes before you get home so that you come home and your home is heated up, because God forbid, you got to throw on a blanket for the first 30 minutes while you wait for your home to heat up. We buy shoes and we complain that our shoes are hurting. Our feet are hurting from our shoes for the first week until we break the shoes in. God, I get a blister here. Do you know what our ancestors would have done for a pair of damn Crocs? They wouldn't have cared that they're not stylish, and that's debatable. Some people think they are stylish. The point is that we vastly increased our creature comforts over the years, and we're probably at a peak right now. I mean, certainly that's what the evidence suggests. And worldwide violence is trending down. So despite all that, you might think, well, why the hell would David Goggins be sprinting and doing all these marathons and running and staying hard and encouraging people to stay hard? Before I go off sounding like an old man complaining that, the younger generation is too soft and we need to harden up our younger generation, which I do think that's true. But, ultimately this is a good thing. Like, societal progress is a good thing. It's a good thing that we're having less wars. It's a good thing that global conflict is going down. It's a good thing that we have more comforts. But it comes at a cost. Comfort, lack of war, etc. There's nothing wrong with that. But surely there's something wrong, because depression is also on the rise. And you look at the Western world, comfort hasn't done us the best in terms of our psychology. The problem with all of these comforts, with the lack of war, and that's a weird thing to say, right? What's the problem with having no war? But the problem is that our psychology thrives on challenge. We need to feel resistance in order to have meaning in our lives. And that's why people feel so great after the gym. Sure, you get endorphins that kick in and we get better blood flow, etc. But psychologically, we feel good after the gym because we've done something difficult. We have a little bit of respect for ourselves. And that's also why we feel great after completing some work, doing our laundry, making our beds in the morning. We've accomplished something, albeit it might be small, but it's something that we didn't want to do, but we felt like we had to do, and we did it anyway. We pushed through that wall of something that we don't want to do. The problem with much of the challenge of life being technologied, is that a word? Probably not. But the problem with the challenge of life just being technologied out of existence is that the world doesn't give us challenge by default now. And sure, it does, right? I mean, we have peer pressure to deal with and this and that, etc. But really, if you think by the standards of what our ancestors had to go through, like, we don't really have that much of a challenging life anymore. We have to seek it out. Cue David Goggins running with his shirt off in a rainstorm, telling us about how his running buddy didn't want to go running that day because it was raining and cold, and cue Joe Rogan, despite all of his success, waking up in the morning and doing a damn ice bath, right? It's really an odd phenomenon. Life used to give us so much inherent challenge, and in the absence of that inherent challenge, we need to create our own. We need to design weightlifting sports and ice bath tubs and protocols and saunas. So point number one on this Staying Hard episode, being resilient, is that for better or worse, we are designed to draw meaning from overcoming challenges. Now, the second point here, a point which I've made before on this podcast, is that, just because things are good and peaceful right now does not mean that they always will be. Now, sure, worldwide violence is trending down, but will it forever? Is that trend going to continue? In technical analysis for stocks, they say the trend is your friend until the end. And so, yeah, sure, maybe that trend is our friend, but it can also reverse. Trends are broken as well. Surely the wars that just started around the globe really begs the question, like, is this the turning of the tide? Are things going to change now going forward? And I'll tell you that here's what I know for sure. Keeping yourself hard by challenging yourself in various ways is of a benefit to your family, to your community, to your country, your fellow man. Because if and when shit hits the fan, you can be the one strong enough to grab the line and toe the line. If the U.S. got invaded tomorrow and nobody could drive anymore because the enemy had all the highways and the roads blocked and everyone had to travel by foot to get to safe areas, like, do you think David Goggins would be worried at all about having to walk miles and miles for days on end just to get to a safe place? I mean, I like to think that Goggins he'd even enjoy something like that. He'd be like, damn, this is it. Let's go, mofo, right? Now, the other benefit here is that not only are you more prepared for when shit hits the fan, but when you do difficult things on a regular basis, all of a sudden the little things that used to bother you in life, like, they just fall by the wayside. They just fall by the wayside because, you know what, this is nothing. This is such a small thing, being stuck in traffic and someone being rude to you. It's like, man, I do difficult things. That doesn't bother me. That's not a difficult thing. I can tell you right now, the first thing I do in the morning is an ice bath, and it's probably going to be the most stressful thing I do that day. Now, I have stress in my life, man. I work a challenging job, and, you know, I got all the other stress that people have to deal with. Just day-to-day life stuff. But when I get up in the morning and I put myself in freezing cold water, I am in a physical survival state. My body is under extreme emotional stress. My cortisol, the stress hormone, just spikes. It's an environment where your body is telling you, hey, Strong Stoic, is it? If you stay in here much longer, you're probably going to die, man. So you might want to get the hell out. Now, the last point I want to make here is that doing hard things means you can build respect and confidence for yourself. I want to do another episode just on this idea, but I'll introduce it here. You know, we talk about confidence today as if it's a mindset. It's like it's a switch that you can just flip on. You can flip on confidence. People say, just be confident in yourself. That's all you need in life. No, wrong. That's so wrong. Confidence comes from respecting yourself, from doing things that are challenging, because that's how you respect yourself. How can you have any respect for yourself if you've told yourself that you were going to go to the gym 4 times this week and you just didn't? Not because you couldn't, not because you didn't have the time, because you were just lazy. You just stayed on the couch and watched TV and had Cheeto dust all up in you. Like, how can you respect yourself if you're doing that? How can you have confidence if you can't look back on the last week, the last day, the last year and say, you know what? Yeah, I missed the mark a few times, but I did some challenging things. I did some things that I knew I had to do, and I didn't complain about it. I just did it. And look at me now. Now I know what I am capable of. That's how you build confidence in yourself. It's not a switch that you just flip on. It's built by looking back at your past and saying, I've overcome a few things in this life. That's where confidence comes from. If you love yourself, you will act in such a way that you eventually respect yourself. Do hard things so that you can respect yourself. For God's sake, man. To stay hard and resilient, you need to regularly do hard things. But let me give you some practical advice here coming up near the end of the episode. How do I stay hard? How do people stay hard? Well, here's some examples here, or some suggestions perhaps. But I just want to start by saying that there's really no easy way out. Tom Petty says there ain't no easy way out. There's no easy way out when it comes to this stuff. Like, it's just you have to do hard things. That's the answer. How do you stay hard? How do you stay resilient? You do hard things. You do things that demand resilience, okay? There ain't no easy way out. Here's some things that you can try to implement. First, get some exercise in every single day. This is probably the best thing you can do for yourself. Every day, get a little sweat on. Now, every day doesn't have to be a Goggins workout. It doesn't have to be anything extreme, but you should do something every day, even if it's just to get outside for a walk, run, lift a bit of weights. Also on the exercise front, I would say once a week, Do a workout that's challenging. Do something that scares you a little bit, that you don't want to do, that gives you a little bit of anxiety. God forbid we feel a little bit of anxiety in our modern world, right? I mean, we talk so much about how do you reduce anxiety? How do you reduce anxiety? Well, I can tell you one thing. I still get anxiety about things that I've been doing for over a decade. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of anxiety, albeit there are severe problems from time to time. But the point is that just because you have anxiety doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means there's something that's challenging you. And you know what? That's probably a good thing. You guys also know that I love ice baths. Put yourself in some cold water, man. Do that every morning. And you tell me if you're not resilient in a year. Now, the above things I mentioned, those are some examples. You can do those daily, weekly to keep weakness at bay. But there's one more thing that I'm going to be implementing that I would like to share with you, dear friends. I heard this from Bedros Keuilian on his podcast. Now, he has this event that he calls Suckfest, in which one day a year he works all day as he normally does, and then he hikes all night until the sun comes up. He gets blisters on his feet. He says he usually loses a few toenails, which is interesting. But he gets through the night. He has that resilience and he gets through it. Now, this is what I would call a test of how far you can go. You see, we never really know what we're capable of until we go through it. My friends, you are capable of some tremendous feats if only you were to push yourself. If you were to voluntarily tell yourself that you're going to do it. And it doesn't have to be a 12-hour hike. It can be many things. It can be a marathon. It can be a 10K. It can be standing under a waterfall for 4 hours, which the Japanese do. It's a practice they call misogi. Now, what am I doing? Because this is actually a pretty recent thing. I've always implemented hard things in my life, but I realized after listening to that episode by Bedros Keuilian that I need to have something that's a little bit harder than I do maybe once a year, maybe once a month. So what did I decide to do? I decided on January 2nd of 2024, because I'm going to be with my family on January 1st, or I would do it January 1st. On January 2nd, I will be doing a 3-minute ice bath every hour on the hour for 12 hours straight. That's going to be in 4 degrees Celsius water. This scares the shit out of me because 3 minutes once a day is hard enough, but I want to start the year off after the holidays with something that I can look back on and say, even after the holidays, I can endure a lot of suck. I can look back on that for the rest of the year and think, God damn, I did 36 minutes in one day of freezing cold ice exposure. I can do 3 minutes this morning. So, dear friends, how will you be challenging yourself in this coming year?